Andrew myself, I will specifically be talking about adult obesity in Mississippi. Now, don't mind the nasalness, as allergies are just kicking my butt right now. I'm sure a lot of you are potentially going through the same thing, and yeah, it sucks. So, don't mind my voice for the rest of this video. That being said, let's get right into it. But before we discuss the specificity of, that's a word, of Mississippi and adult obesity, let's just talk about some general things here. First off, what even is obesity? Now I know we all study nutrition, and yeah, like that's obvious, but you always have to start off with the general stuff. So who defines it? Not like who is defining it? No. I am talking about the World Health Organization. They define obesity as an abnormal or excessive fat accumulation that may impair health. Now, this is also, when one's energy expenditure does not match one's caloric intake. Now, utilizing BMI, adults that are overweight, which falls between 25 to 29, and obesity is 30 and over. And I put metric maybe skewed because this should be applied for like a normal person, right? I mean, like, you're not gonna call prime Arnold Schwarzenegger obese or C-bomb, right? You're not going to call them obese. So what are some causes of obesity, as we have the chicken and the egg here? As stated previously, when you don't match the energy out with energy coming in, so lack of physical activity, which is a very big problem. Not a lot of people are getting the I believe World Health Organization put out that people should be getting 150 minutes of moderate physical activity a week, but of course a lot of people aren't matching that, which can lead to some other issues. Environment, so access to certain foods or just lack thereof. You have more access to caloric dense foods, or you don't have access to nutrient dense foods and things like that. Sleep also plays a big factor. Some people are like, oh, I only need 2 hours of sleep. Yeah, but that's not really good. You should be getting 7 to 9. Alcohol consumption, too much alcohol, of course. The sugars that are in alcohol, I believe alcohol is 7 grams of calorie or something along those lines. So drinking too much obviously will accumulate over time. Smoking, that definitely plays a part into it. It's not the whole cause, but it's the accumulation of doing these things that'll lead up to it. And then, of course, impact on one's social determinants of health, depending on what your social life is, your family life, where you're going through your mind, education, and political. And we'll be discussing more of that later on. So just some general stuff about obesity in the US since CDC's initial tracking of obesity. 1962, with a sample size of 6,100, had about 13%. And compared to that to many years later, I don't want to do the math right now, I'm not a math major, compared to 2010, with about 5,300, 800 less, which had about 36% of obesity. And of course, as of September 2021, via State of Childhood Obesity, great website, check it out. Adult obesity rates are above 35% in 16 states. Now let's finally take a look at obesity in Mississippi. Now Mississippi for years has been leading the country in obesity for the most part. I mean, there's some dips here where it's like second, rarely third, right around this portion, if you can see my mouse here. And the highest point was about here, which is approximately 41%, but as of 2020, it is just 40%, more specifically 39.7, but I digress. So yep, as of 2020, Mississippi leads all states since 1990, consistently number one, of course. And then a recent report from the Mississippi State Department of Health indicates that Mississippi obesity rate could reach 66% by 2030 if unaddressed. 2 out of 3 people will be obese, adults, and we are in 2022. It's not that far away, to be honest. It really isn't. And there's also a big, huge, how to say big and huge, excuse me, there's a huge racial disparity in obesity, which again we'll touch more on later. So obesity in Mississippi continued. Mississippi is the poorest state in the U.S., highest in poverty. 20% of the population is food insecure, and these are like direct causes as to why Mississippi can be, or why Mississippi is the most obese state in the U.S. Mississippi ranks bottom 6 in education in the United States. And marketing. Marketing does play a factor. Food and beverage marketing tend to target people of color. This is very similar to how big tobacco would target lower income communities with tobacco products. This is the same situation. This may result in higher consumption of products being promoted. Targeted marketing can include ads, scholarships, sales, employment opportunities as well, which is unfortunate because when you see commercials now, whether it's a McDonald's commercial, a Sprite commercial, right? You're seeing these top tier athletes. You're seeing, other people of color, like, oh, these people are eating it, maybe I should eat it too. And that definitely has a negative negative effect on people. And of course, culture. Culture does play a role. Some believe taking foods away and incorporating other foods would actually take away the individual from their own culture, whether they, the way they cook it, whether it's salt, sugar, etc. The way they prep things. So we are continuing again, as we're going to look at a study done, an assessment of the food retail environment in counties with high obesity rates in Mississippi. So these are just some key takeaways. This was done in 2020, looking at the counties that had the high rates of obesity. 1. The average median household income in counties with high obesity was much lower than that of the rest of the state. Those counties averaged about $27,000 compared to the state average of $45,000. Average unemployment, child poverty were higher in those counties than the state average. Lower were education levels, about the same for people with a high school diploma. People in these counties have also reported to be physically inactive as well. Those phone calls, hey, take part of this survey. Those are self-reported. In these high obesity counties, food prices are cheaper, yes, but that's because of the influx of caloric dense foods. For example, Holmes County, the price of fruits and vegetables were 5% and 3.1% higher, but 3.2% and 6.3% lower for ice cream, sugar, and sweets. Okay, the caloric dense foods drove the price down. So, although yes, it looks as if the price of food is cheaper, in actuality it isn't. Thus causing it to seem like, then moving on, the negative consequences of comparatively high healthy foods may disproportionately affect African American communities, as I was talking about before, and deepen racial inequality in health. Let's move on here and actually look at an intervention done about a decade ago. This is the only one I could find, like an actual intervention and not like a study, so to speak. So this was done, church-based diet and physical activity for African American population in the lower Mississippi Delta. This took place within 6 months between 2010 and 2011, and their goal was to improve diet and increase physical activity amongst the target population. So let's take a look at the study. The eight churches were assigned. The control group had about 208, and the intervention had about 195. So what was assessed? Dietary, physical activity, anthropometric, and clinical measures. Although anthropometric and clinical measures weren't the priority, they did include it there because it does have a factor to play. So every month, there's a 60-minute educational session about one's lifestyle, foods to eat, portion sizes, etc. And then one session focused on physical activity. So intervention participants received a binder. They had all these things, more, marketing, certain physical activities that they should do. But participants in the control group only received bi-monthly newsletters containing information pertaining to those certain things like colds, food safety, and stress relief. But let's take a look at the results. So they found that significant improvements in diet were observed in both control and intervention. Significant increases in both aerobic physical activity, strength, flexibility, physical activity in the intervention, but not the control group. And I forgot to mention here that this didn't really show much of an effect. So none of the changes in anthropometric and clinical measures, were significant. So like I said earlier, they weren't that big of a deal. Retention rates, how many people wanted to continue to follow through this 6-month step, approximately 85% for each. Now, a positive relationship was actually found with those who owned a vehicle and completed the intervention. It is common for rural areas that are economically deprived and don't have their own vehicles, as this can result as a perceived barrier in order to get interventions, access to food, etc. So what did we learn? Interventions can actually work in a specific population, but they have to address some of the barriers that come across it, such as socio-economic status of the participants. Now here are some possible solutions for obesity in Mississippi. So let's talk about revamping the education system from K to 12. Since the counties that had high obesity rates mostly were adults with high school diplomas, so since most of them had just a high school diploma, you might want to incorporate more lessons and programs in high school in order to educate these people. And I'm going to follow up here with interventions and program development. Develop better programs, develop more interventions that are convenient for the participants and not just for the people doing the intervention. So let's take a look at an increase in workforce as well. The federal government is actually the biggest employer in Mississippi. Agriculture is still the biggest industry in the state, which employs 29% of state workforce. Now you can maybe build factories, more farms, something along those lines, but Mississippi is the poorest state. Try to have some sort of way to incorporate more funds to come in. Marketing. Now I mentioned marketing earlier, which was targeted towards people of color to eat fast foods and caloric dense foods, but have some sort of anti-marketing, counter-marketing, where similar to how anti-vape commercials and things of that nature, stop vaping or whatever, have something similar to that with caloric dense foods. Now making nutrient-dense foods more accessible. A lot of people don't have access to supermarkets. They only have access to like a bodega or something along those lines, where they're not gonna, a bodega's not gonna have, fresh fruits and vegetables at a reasonable price, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, 5% and like 3% are higher for fruits and vegetables, while 3 and 6% lower for caloric dense foods. Now, better investment in public transportation. As the intervention stated, there's a positive relationship between people who had a car and people who participated in intervention. So you might want to, do something about that. Have better public transportation, have better busing system, have a better train system, perhaps as well. And a change in leadership, and I'm referring, politically. It doesn't matter who was in charge. I had to check. There's Democrat and Republican leaders, throughout 1990 to this point, and there just has to be some sort of change, to where they can perhaps get programs and develop laws that'll promote a healthier lifestyle. And here are my sources. Yep, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it up to this point outside of the professor, because I'm assuming she has to watch these, I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.